You are watching an episode in our Landlording A to Z series, where we walk you through the steps, skills, and challenges involved with residential rental real estate investing. We share our expert advice, including the tips, tricks, and strategies we've learned over years of managing rental property. Please subscribe to our channel to get notified each time a new episode comes out, and please like and share our content with people you know who might be interested. Thanks for watching.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another Landlord Guru's Landlording A to Z episode. Today we are going to be talking about collecting rent and all the various issues and things to consider when you are collecting rent. In the past, we've had episodes where we've talked about everything from purchasing your first rental property to getting it ready to find a tenant. On some of those, we talked a bit about collecting deposits and those initial move-in costs. And we sort of briefly discussed and touched on the various methods of rent collection at that time. So we'll get into it a little bit more today. Ways to collect it and some of the best practices around it. So we'll talk about the forms of payments, the grace periods, things like late fees, what happens if you have a missing payment, pay or vacate notices. We'll talk about past due rent and setting up payment schedules and things like that. So, before we get started, we'll just remind everybody to like and subscribe and click on the notifications and do all the YouTube things.
Yep. This series is kind of us taking in our minds being a landlord from the very beginning, from deciding to invest all the way through all of the steps involved. So if you subscribe, you'll get notifications each time we put one of these episodes out. And obviously we'd love that. And if you'd share this with others as well. Okay, so I'll launch into what some of the most common options are for collecting rent or collecting payments in general. One is cash, and I think this is less and less common. Fewer and fewer people seem to carry cash. We recommend against it, just given that it's not very secure to carry around a whole bunch of cash. It can be, or just plain lost, let alone, having somebody see it taking an envelope and deciding they'd like to have it. You really should issue a receipt if you do that, and that's difficult to do in the moment. And the next option are peer-to-peer payment platforms. So these are your Venmo, PayPal, I guess there's Cash App. I've never used that, right? And Zelle, that type of thing. So there are a lot of them out there that, most people know they're really easy. And that's the point, is to make transferring money between people really painless and easy. But there's some issues. So one of which is that in many locations, if a tenant makes even a partial payment, even $1, then that means they've made a partial payment on rent due and eviction proceedings can't begin. So they can essentially not pay rent, but make some nominal payment, and it can hang up in the process of initiating evictions or stall it if you have started it.
Right. Yeah. So you may have a tenant that hasn't been paying, and then you've started eviction proceedings with them, and in some cases it can take several months to make any progress. And then all of a sudden one day they just decide to just send $1 or $10 to you through one of these peer-to-peer platforms, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't decline the payment. You can't send it back.
Send it back, yeah.
So
right.
in effect, you have collected rent for your property. And so, the courts will say, yeah, the eviction has to start over then at that point.
Which is generally a months-long process. And you can have somebody who's not paying that entire time, the lump sum.
Yep.
So in addition to that issue, there are sometimes fees. I think a significant issue are transfer limits. Chris, have you run into that with Zelle?
Yeah, I think it's Zelle, and there might be some others too, or maybe even the first. I think often they might up that limit after you've completed several payments, but
Right. So you'd have to have somebody remember to send you a partial rent on a couple of days. There's just uncertainty in that and clunkiness. Like Chris said, you can't cancel or return. And there sometimes are episodes of people sending accidentally payments to a wrong account. There are safeguards with some systems, but you don't want that room for error. So
yeah, it's like they made it so easy that sometimes it can be too easy to just send the money and it might not get to the right place.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll also talk about direct bank transfers. That's another option to do. I know that we've done this in a few cases where you just give the tenant your bank account info and the routing number and the account number, and then they can go to their bank. They can do it online sometimes, or they just enter in that routing number and the account number, and then the money goes directly there. So it's very similar to peer-to-peer, but it's actually run through your bank. It can be easy, but at the same time, you're sending the details like your routing number and your account number, and there's the possibility that number then is just out there. It's unsafe or insecure. So it's maybe slightly more secure than some of the peer-to-peer, but there's still that uncertainty that's out there. And like with the other peer-to-peer options that we just talked about, there's no way to restrict the partial rent payments, and they can just direct transfer you a minimal amount, and it starts the whole eviction proceedings over from the start.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't really recommend that either. I mean, it's an option, but
You're right. Yeah, I mean, think about giving every new tenant your bank account number. It's probably fine, but you got to go find it, send it to them. It goes out into places unknown, and
yeah, and then they often forget, and it's that extra step that they have to remember. Then when it comes the next month, they got to do it again. So.
Yeah, you can't set up automatic transfers that way. I don't think either. So this brings us to what our preferred method of taking payments is our property management software platforms, and there are a lot of them out there. We've made it one of our missions to review most of the leading products out there. So there are lots of reviews and comparisons on our site that you can go check out. And we feel like it's a better option. Products like Avail or PayRent or Tenant Cloud, Chris and I have used all three, and there are lots more, but they're safe, they're secure. You put your banking information into that platform once, it's never seen by any of your tenants. And then an applicant who's becoming a tenant puts their banking information into the platform, and then they enable the rental payments or deposit payments as well. Usually there's a way to set up either a one-time payment of reimbursement for utilities or security deposit, and then there are recurring payments. So there's just a better list of features and functions in terms of payments. Tenants can set up auto payment. You can separate parking or utilities, or you can set up all kinds of different functionality. So, and it comes as a bundle with all these other property management features, such as advertising, listings, taking applications, or ordering the screening reports, signing leases, communicating about maintenance. So, there's a whole host of features and functions that you get along with that. So we feel like those are really worthwhile, and that some benefits are that you save time and labor. You put all that information in once. With automation and automatic late rent functionality, we found that late rent goes way down. It's almost a non-occurrence. And often, these products also have kind of some built-in accounting and bookkeeping functionality. So you got a rent roll right there, for example. So there's just a lot of added value.
Yeah, and like you said, with those different types of payments, like for parking or reimbursement or anything like that, that just can go automatically into the reporting and the accounting, specifically into those categories.
Right.
Rent. So again, that just makes it that much easier. And like you say, with this property management software, rent collection software, it reduces the amount of late rent and missed payments and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so some other issues and best practices that we'll talk about. And first one, sort of on the top of my mind, was grace periods. Like, should you allow for grace periods? Sometimes you have a tenant that has something unexpected comes up and they ask for extra time to pay rent, maybe it's a day or maybe it's a week, and in some cases, maybe they just forgot to do it on that particular day. You're not using property management software with automated reminders and rent payments, and they just forget. So, if you have a good tenant, who usually pays rent on time, you might consider allowing a late payment or two, I guess. So that's sort of one of those judgment calls. Some people say never do it. But, if you are inclined to have a little bit of grace, I guess, it's an option. I would say be careful. It can be a slippery slope. You allow that one late payment and that becomes the second late payment, and who knows? It can be an issue. Ways to alleviate that, I guess, if you have a set due date, usually that's on the first of the month, right? And generally, you'll see leases that include a grace period of 5 days before late fees are enforced. I think we recommend to have those late fees set up so that if you use software, that those automatically get applied as soon as they are late, because it's easier to waive a late fee if there is truly an exceptional circumstance where someone says, I just can't get it there on time this month. But if that late fee is already there and applied, you can easily waive that if you want to. But the alternative is, if you don't have those late fees that get set, then it's harder to enforce it. First time it comes around, you might think it's okay, but then that second time, and then there's a pattern where that late fee is not being enforced, and it's probably harder to get that set up when you actually do need to enforce it down the road.
Right. Yeah. It's also just less administrative work to have it automatically happen. So in most leases, like Chris said, there's a 3 to 5 day period where it's not considered late until it's 3 to 5 days. And actually, a lot of locations, a lot of cities stipulate that you have to give a few days of grace period. And it just makes some sense. Hopefully you're not so cash flow dependent that it has to be there on the first. If so, it could be problematic. People need a little bit of wiggle room. So anyway, with late fees, again, property management software, it will allow you to set what that grace period is, how much the late fee is, whether or not it's a single time late fee in Seattle. It's now a single $10 fee is the maximum per month. But in other places, you can set either a percentage or a one-time fee plus a per day fee. Late fees can help encourage tenants to pay on time, but in some places like here in Seattle, you're limited on how much you can charge and how much you can collect. So I think even that little bit, people don't want to be late on their rent.
Right.
So, and even that $10, well, I don't think it's really enough to encourage people who don't want to pay their rent. Most people do, and they don't want that late fee, even if it's just $10. So,
Yeah, and it's just a reminder to let them know that, yeah, it's important to pay on time.
Yeah.
Is what happens when you don't.
Yeah. So what happens if, non-payment of rent? So, payments are late, like Chris is saying, it's best to enforce those late fees because it establishes the expectations and doesn't set you off on that slippery slope. The property management software can automatically send reminders. So you can, in a lot of them, you can set it up so you and or the tenant get a reminder a few days before rent is due. Most of my tenants set up automatic payments because they don't want the hassle either. And then if they do miss a rent payment, we highly advise that you be disciplined about sending out pay or vacate notices immediately. Generally, my policy is if somebody tells me that something's going on, then I'll give them a bit of leeway. But pretty quickly there, you got to start documenting things. Even if they end up paying soon thereafter, having a document that they've missed rent is important because in a lot of places, you have to demonstrate a history of non-payment in order for it to be grounds for termination of a lease. Here, I think it's 3 or 4 late rents over the course of a 12-month period.
And so not just for termination, even if you don't want to renew them when their lease expires.
Well, yeah, now that Seattle and a lot of other places are now, just cause tenancy locations, which means the only way to terminate a vacancy is for one of these listed grievances, valid reasons, one of which is non-payment of rent. So, so document, be diligent about documenting and sending those notices.
Yeah, exactly. And then we've talked about this before, setting up payment schedules. Property management software, you can automate that, but in some cases, I guess I'm thinking of payment schedules that are not just the first of every month, right? Like there may be instances where you want to set up a custom payment. Maybe there's a tenant who gets paid every other week or twice a month, and they may not have the best history of hanging on to that money until the first of the next month so they can pay. So, and then they may recognize it as well. So it might be something where you set up half a month's rent on the first of the month and half a month's rent on the 15th. When you allow for that so that they can then, as soon as they get paid, that first big chunk goes directly to rent. So, and that just, I guess it helps them manage their money and it ensures that you get that full month of rent. It may not be all up front on the first, but you might want to consider just taking half up front and then half in the middle. And if you have a rent collection software that can automate that and automatically debit the tenant's accounts on the first and on the 15th, then, at the end of the day, you're still getting your rent and it's coming to you on time. And if there's no chance of the tenant kind of, saying, hey, I don't have enough on the first, can I pay the second, half of it on the 15th after I get paid again? So just something to consider. Not everybody will do that, but I think especially with software that can automate it, it becomes a little bit easier. So it's something to consider.
Yeah, you can set up 2 or 4 monthly payments, half of rent on the first and half of rent on the 15th of every month. And each one of those things is set so that it's a charge that recurs each month. So, that's pretty handy. On another note, I have a tenant who I allow to pay because there's a reason about when they get their income on the 15th. So again, depending on how sensitive you are to cash flow, it's just generally good practice, I think, if you can, to work with people, given what their circumstances are, to a degree, and I never say, well, you didn't pay rent this month, but, hey, get that to me soon. It's always about communication and setting expectations, but where I can, I meet them in where they are and what their circumstances are. So that being said, our takeaways are: be diligent with rent collection, set expectations for when and how people should pay, send notifications if they, documenting if they don't pay, be on top of that. And again, we talk lots about this, but we really believe in it. Consider using a property management software product. There are lots of good ones out there. Send us a message if you want some input or read our reviews. We've been very thorough. You can automate most of your property management tasks, and rent collection is one of them. And I used to go collect and scan checks and deposit them. I don't do any of that. I just go and I check to see whether or not there's ever any overdue balance. It's a logging in once. So it's really a useful tool. So our next episode is going to be on evictions. So we'll be getting that out in the next couple of weeks. Again, please like, share, subscribe, and come back and see us next time. We appreciate you watching, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.